Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on crop mapping using the WEkEO DS. We have here today, let me show you a quick overview of the agenda. We have here today some interesting speakers that will show you the world of crop mapping using Sentinel data in the WEkEO DS. From the WEkEO user support side, we have Amin El Amrani, who is an expert in all of the technical questions that you may have on the WEkEO DS, on the Jupyter notebook, on getting access to the platform and to the data. Stefan will give an introduction to the DS. He's been involved in Copernicus user uptake for many years. And has seen the birth of the Copernicus DS in person. Jeff Smith is an expert on land use and land cover mapping. He's been involved in on a daily basis in extracting environmental information from Sentinel and other satellite imagery. And he will be giving the training, and then I will be guiding you through some of the other data that are on the platform. That are on the WEkEO DS. And so together we have prepared the following agenda for you. We will start with an introduction to the WEkEO website. Where do you register? Where do you access the data? What can you do with the WEkEO DS? I will go a little bit more deeper into depth on the data catalog. Which contains the Sentinel satellite images, but also various other geospatial data. Amin will give an introduction to the IT infrastructure and the pricing, so the resources that you have to your disposal in the WEkEO DS. And then Jeff will give a training on crop mapping using Sentinel data, using the Jupyter notebooks on the WEkEO DS. So, if you have any questions during this webinar, please do ask them in the Q&A. As you can see in the Q&A on the bottom, just above type your message, you have the possibility to click the question mark, which will indicate for us that it's a question, and then we can also take it up later at the end of the webinar to answer your questions live. Just in case that there's no time, that there's a lot of questions and we don't have the time to answer all of them live, rest assured that we will collect all of the questions and answer them separately afterwards if that would be needed. And of course, there's always the support email address, support@wekeo.eu, and the on Twitter @WEkEODS if you have any further questions. So without further ado, let's jump into the program with Stefan and the introduction to the WEkEO DS and platform.
Good morning everyone, or good afternoon for those who are following us from different time zones. So I'm Stefan Urovic. I'm a senior expert in WEkEO user support, and I will run you through a rapid presentation of this DS and explain why, in our view, it is unique. I apologize to those who've already heard this, similar presentations, but in every one of our webinars, we have a mix of people that attend for the first time and people that have already attended previous ones. So, what is WEkEO? WEkEO is one of the 5 DSs. The European Commission basically decided that something needed to be done to facilitate access to Copernicus data from the Sentinel satellites and from the 6 Copernicus services, because bandwidth issues, hard disk capacity, processing power, etc., were seen as a barrier to the wide adoption of all this data for environmental and other applications. So it co-funded 5 DSs. Why 5? Because, well, this is a competitive world, and because this was such a new technology, it was felt that it should be that competition would provide possibly some novel ideas. So basically, WEkEO is an alliance between EUMETSAT, between the European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecast, Mercator Océan, and has been recently joined by the European Environment Agency. What does this mean? That means that, and it's a unique feature of the WEkEO DIAS, it means that the promoters, the implementers of WEkEO, are the producers or the custodians of most of the Copernicus data. So it means that you're going to get the most up-to-date data, and you're going to get a lot of benefits from just directly dealing with the people that process the data, that create the products, etc., etc. WEkEO DIAS has nevertheless been built with really a task force of European industry to provide the various components of the system, and we today are representing the user support organization. So what does WEkEO contain? WEkEO contains basically all the open data of Copernicus. Nearly all the data of Copernicus is open. There's only one exception. It is the security services, which are reserved to obviously governmental authorized users. But all the other data, be it data from the 7 Sentinel satellites currently in orbit, or from one of the 5 Copernicus services, it's a one-stop shop where you'll find everything. But everything supplemented by an IT infrastructure with cloud storage, with cloud processing, with tools, with user development and management, with a marketplace to give you examples of what one can do with Copernicus data by using the WEkEO DIAS. And last but not least, a dedicated user dedicated high-level user support service, because of the variety of data that is included. Very different types of data sets. I mean, Sentinel-5 atmospheric composition data is going to be very different from Sentinel-2 optical high-resolution data. So we have set up a team of experts, and in that respect, I believe that WEkEO is rather unique, because all the other DIASs have been set up by private organizations that do not necessarily have the full breadth of knowledge about the various information, data sets, etc., available in WEkEO. So what does it contain? As I said, all the Copernicus data. Today we're talking about land use, land cover. It does have the entire Copernicus land cover, high resolution, very high resolution data sets from Copernicus land. It has all the land data. Just one example is the imperviousness layer. So basically detecting all the footprint of all the built up areas in the 39 countries of the European Environment that are members of the European Environment Agency. It contains a high-resolution digital elevation model and all kinds of specialized products on coastal zones, products on riparian zones, the zones around rivers, products about Natura 2000, protected biodiversity sites, etc., etc. It also contains, since recently, a snow and ice high-resolution product near real-time, and it will contain in the future any new products such as, for instance, the European ground movement service data, which will be published and will identify the ground subsidence throughout the EEA member states. So, as I said, the partners are the custodians of the data, and that's really one of the unique features, because who knows best the Copernicus Land Monitoring Service data? Well, it's obviously the people who are supervising their development, and that is the European Environment Agency. EUMETSAT, dealing with Sentinel-3 data or with Sentinel-5P data, obviously has the best possible knowledge. So the same applies to some of our user support team members who have a very in-depth knowledge of Sentinel-1 and all potential applications of synthetic aperture radar, Sentinel-2, etc., etc. Another unique feature is our data, the data contained in the WEkEO DIAS, is not a copy. All the other DIASs, they basically clone what is published by the various providers of Copernicus data and information. In our case, we just set up a direct pipeline through distributed architecture to all the data that is there and is already on the servers of Mercator, of ECMWF, of EUMETSAT. So there's only the Sentinel-2 and Sentinel-1 that is basically replicated. The advantage is speed. The advantage is you have the most possibly up-to-date data sets available. And the third advantage is, and that's important today, is a very low carbon footprint, because we don't replicate a fifth of, for the fifth time, the full data sets of Copernicus. We have a strong focus on user development and user management. A lot of public support material, FAQs, tutorials, knowledge hubs, etc. Again, we believe we're the only ones that basically could answer any question that your user would have about WEkEO or about any of the data sets, because we have a two-level user support, a level 1 that answers easy questions, but a level 2 that will reach out, either will know the answer to the questions or will reach out to the experts that we're connected to, whether in academia, in the European Space Agency, or any research organization. So that's unique. So there is that two-level support, and it's accessible in various ways, but the easiest way is obviously to send an email to support@wekeo.eu. It's not only a tool for, let's say, individual or research. It's also a tool that is more and more used by SMEs, but also by larger scale service providers to actually implement production of EO Copernicus-based products. Just to give you one example, that snow and ice product that I was mentioning, that is just recently joined the catalog of the European Environment Agency's Copernicus Land Monitoring Service. This is produced using WEkEO, large scale. It really means across the 39 countries of EEA, acquiring all the Sentinel-2 data, processing it in near real time, and making it available as high-level products to all the users of the product. So again, we are completely at your disposal to be answering any detailed question, even the tricky ones that you would have. There are several ways of reaching us. The WEkEO portal, where you have you can fill in your question, or writing directly to the email support@wekeo.eu, or we even answer questions. We consider as questions what is the questions that are addressed to the Twitter account that is operated by WEkEO. That's it in terms of introduction.
Thank you, Stefan. You've already gotten a good overview now of what's available on the WEkEO DIAS. And I will go a little bit deeper into the data themselves. So as Stefan already mentioned, the power or the strength of the WEkEO DIAS is that it offers a single data access point for all of the Copernicus data and information. So the Sentinel data and the information from the Copernicus services. And it combines it with cloud-based processing and any tools that you might need to work with those Earth observation and geospatial data. And then couple that with strong user support to help you get started, to help you see what the possibilities are. We are setting you up hopefully for success with the WEkEO DIAS and with developing your own applications. So very importantly, and perhaps to remind you, the data that are available on the WEkEO DIAS are not copied to a central WEkEO DIAS server or cloud. But they are taken from the data access points of the different Sentinel data and the different Copernicus services, with the benefit that new data are immediately available, and there's no transfer time needed or any issues with transferring or copying the data themselves. So what is it exactly that you can find? The Copernicus program offers a lot of data, a wide range of data. You have the Copernicus Services, which are comprised of the Copernicus Marine Environment Monitoring Service, Copernicus Climate Change Monitoring Service, Atmosphere Monitoring Service, Land Monitoring Service. And then you have the Sentinel data, where we already have 5 different Sentinel satellites or constellations in orbit. So that's quite a lot of data, and they are managed by the 2 different more space-related agencies, EUMETSAT and the European Space Agency. In terms of the Copernicus services, those are managed by some European expert institutions concerning the services themselves. So you have Mercator, who is an expert on marine environment, ICMWF, who is the European Center for Mid-Range Weather Forecasting. So they're experts on climate change on the long term and on atmosphere monitoring on the short term. And the European Environment Agency, together with DG-JRC, the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, who deals with all of the land monitoring data. So I will quickly go over all of those different services and Sentinels, so you get an idea of what is possible, what kind of data are available. The Copernicus Marine Environment Monitoring Service has 3 different types or families of products. You have the blue ocean, so any physical parameters related to oceans, the temperature, the salinity, waves and currents, the sea level. The green ocean, which deals with the productivity of the water bodies of oceans, so acidity, turbidity, nutrients, and living resources. The white ocean, which deals then with sea ice in the Arctic and Antarctic. And the data that are available in those services are based on Sentinel satellite imagery and other satellite imagery, but also they're combined with in situ data, so in situ measurements of different parameters, and with models to really get some actionable information and geospatial data that contain more derived information and insights on the marine environment. And those data are available at a global level, but also in more detail for European basins for the past, present, and the future. So in terms of what the types of data that you can get, it depends a little bit on which ocean. Of course, the Arctic Ocean will contain sea ice data, while the Mediterranean does not have any sea ice data. Ocean color, which is related to the productivity of oceans, is something that you can find in all of the oceans. Waves, other physical parameters, wind, surface currents, is also something that you find for most of all of the oceans that are offered on in the Marine Environment Monitoring Service. And then you have the data themselves, but then you also have more of an analysis and a forecast of these data. And regularly, the models that are used are also being revisited and improved. And when that is done, a reanalysis will be performed on the older data to make sure that the information and the data that you can retrieve from the platform are the most state-of-the-art data that you can get. The atmosphere monitoring and the climate change service are managed by ICMWF. So in terms of atmosphere, also here in this case, we're looking at the atmosphere in Europe, but also globally. And again, it combines in situ measurements, satellite data, and model data to provide analyses of air quality, of solar radiation, greenhouse gases, and forecasts into the future of how will the air quality evolve in the coming days. What's the pollen distribution forecast, for example? And then in the climate change service, we're looking at much longer time periods. An important type of data set that is available are the essential climate variables, which are often used in climate change monitoring projects and reports to assess how the climate is changing. Reanalysis, when those models that predict climate change and the impacts of climate change are being updated, improved, the data themselves will be reanalyzed or reprocessed to get better projections for the future. And perhaps what is also interesting is that if you are looking at the Copernicus climate change service in particular, you also have their climate data store, which offers, outside of the WEkEO DS, their own API and processing in particular for climate change data. The land monitoring service again contains those different components. You have the pan-European component and a global component. And then specifically for land monitoring, you also have a local component where you get land use and land change, land use and land cover information on a local scale, so with a very high detail. And furthermore, from the land monitoring service, you also have some reference data, image mosaics over Europe of very high and high resolution data, a digital elevation model, and the hydrological network in Europe. So what exactly is the kind of information that you can get from the Copernicus Land Monitoring Service? Land use and land cover mapping is the main or the bulk of the information, which is land use and land cover across the globe. Any change, any specific forest types that are changing, but also at a more local level, you have an urban atlas, so land cover and land use within urban areas. Within the same thing within riparian buffer zones, within Natura 2000 sites to monitor the impact of protecting our natural heritage in Europe. And in coastal zones, that's a product that is currently under production and that will be soon available as well. You also find some biophysical parameters, by which we mean some more physical parameters that are deduced from satellite imagery, such as fractional snow cover or snow cover extent, the land surface temperature, surface albedo, reflectance of the canopy. So all of those informations or those data are really useful if you want to monitor the land surface in Europe and globally. Then we move on to the Sentinel data. So we have at the moment Sentinel 1, 2, 3, 5P, and Sentinel 6, which are launched. 1, 2, 3, and 5P are already in production. They're already operational, while Sentinel 6 is currently still in commissioning. So it's been launched in November, and the engineers are now making sure that the satellite is in the proper orbit, that it's carrying out the right measurements. They're looking at the data, calibrating it, validating it, and then they will be on offer as well. As you can see, the EUMETSAT and ESA are distributing the workload on storing and processing these data, depending on their expertise. ESA is doing Sentinel 1, 2, and 3, the land data, and then 5P, while EUMETSAT is dealing more with the marine side of Sentinel-3, and then Sentinel-6 and Sentinel-4 in the future as well. So Sentinel-3 data are in particular of interest for you as well for two different reasons. You have them for marine environment monitoring, but also for land monitoring. You have the ocean and land color instrument, which really gives you information on spectral reflectance in very wide areas in Europe. And those data are then available through ESA. To go more into depth on that, so what you can get from ESA or through ESA, but of course on the WEkEO DS, it's all the same in the same data platform. The Sentinel-1 constellation, which is a SAR, a synthetic aperture radar satellite, so it sees through clouds. It sees through darkness and is applicable for, amongst others, the land cover, creating land cover maps. Sentinel-2 even more, that is often used also to assess the health of vegetation at a more higher resolution, while Sentinel-3 really covers wide areas, so you can monitor the entire Europe in a day. Sentinel-5P is an air quality monitoring satellite, and that's also one of the data that you can retrieve from the platform, but that we will be discussing in a later webinar. So how do you then access the data on the platform? Once you are on the WEkEO website, there's a data tab from where you can immediately get access to the whole catalog and a viewer. The number of data sets available in WEkEO, there are 230 products available. Those are single products, and for each product you then have a whole time series of information. So the number of data is quite big. And you can download them and work with them in the Jupyter notebook as will be shown later on. But you can also view them on the browser itself with some nice examples here of some Sentinel-2 data and some Copernicus land data if you just want to have a look around the data itself and to see how applicable they are to your application. We will move on to Amin, who will discuss more into depth the infrastructure and the tools that you can use to work with these data.
Hello, Anne-Catherine.
Hello.
So I will share my screen here. Okay. So I am going to do a brief presentation of the IT infrastructure, which consists of two main services on WEkEO. So on the one hand, we have the Jupyter environment, and on the other hand, we have the virtual machine environment. So let's start with the Jupyter notebook. All you need to do to have access to Jupyter notebook is to register to WEkEO. So to access it, you have to click the signing button here, connect to your WEkEO account, and then you have to click dashboard and Jupyter Hub here. So I have it already open here. And what is the Jupyter Notebook? Jupyter Notebook is an open source web app that you can use to create and share documents that contain live code, equations, visualizations, and text. And this is the welcome page of the WEkEO Jupyter environment, so to speak. And we have access to many tools. You have a classic Python interpreter here. You have also a a console of a terminal that you can use as a terminal prompt, as you can use in on Linux, and you also have the notebook itself that you can open. You can start from scratch or play an existing file, which you will most certainly do in the webinars and the training. So it is a very useful teaching tool, as the code is associated to text and images. So I can show you one typical WEkEO Jupyter notebook, which is this WEkEO Harmonized Data Access API file. So as you can see, you have you can have images, but also text, augmented text, and most importantly, these cells, code cells, that you can run exactly the same way as if you were in a Python interpreter. And the outcomes and results will be shown of the code that you run will actually be displayed in the document itself. You can also have graphs if you are drawing a graph out of WEkEO data. And this is one of the many introductory documents that contain educational instructions. And mingling with these documents will make you comfortable with the Jupyter environment in a matter of hours. I invite you to look at the webinar number 2 if you want to have more insight on how to use the Jupyter environment, but you can see that this is quite easy. So these documents can also be exported to a PDF. Once you have a nice document and you want to publish it or use it, you can have a PDF out of it, and you can also export it to pure Python code to be used elsewhere. So all what is not Python will be actually commented out, and you will have all just plain Python code that you can use on elsewhere. And when I say elsewhere, I am talking about the virtual machine. That brings us to the virtual machines. So it is another resource that is offered by WEkEO, and some of you might ask, why would we need a virtual machine environment? Isn't the Jupyter environment enough? It is some kind of a small virtual machine, but the Jupyter notebook environment has actually limits. It's not meant for long and heavy processing. The storage capacity is limited. CPU and memory are also limited. And if you want to perform some heavy processing, you should consider switching to one of our virtual machines. So as I was saying, WEkEO has a virtual machine resource offer. And to request a virtual machine, you should go on the dashboard again here and click the upgrade plan button at the end of the page here. So once you click, you can choose the configuration that corresponds to your needs. So we have different plan sizes, and you should fill in the rest of the form and click submit request at the end of the page. So more details on the pricing section of the website are available on this by clicking the pricing on this upper banner of the website. And you can see here all the different combinations of the resources that are offered. So these are the standard plan sizes that you can choose. But if you have some other needs, we can prepare what is called a custom machine for you. And all you have to do is to contact us on support@wekeo.eu, and we will put you in contact with the commercial department of WEkEO to decide on the resources that you might need. So there are also trial periods that are associated to each plan size, and they can also be negotiated on a case-by-case basis, depending on your needs and the use. So all this can be negotiated with the commercial department of WEkEO by sending us a message to support@wekeo.eu. So once you have these resources made available for you, we'll advise you to follow the guides that you can find here. So once you have followed all or some of the instructions that you will find on the guides here, you will be able to create an instance of your virtual machine, an instance or many instances. And once you will do that, you will be able to download and process your data actually as if you were on your personal computer, yet with a tremendous computing capacity and high-speed access to WEkEO data. So if you have any questions, I will refer you to the webinar number 3, where there is a demo on how to download WEkEO data on your Jupyter Hub or on your VM. And I have a small thing to add this time. So I had received many questions about the Python export of the WEkEO Harmonized Data Access API file. I can show you this here. So this is the file which is mainly used on the virtual machine, and it is downloaded from the Jupyter notebook. So we ask you to put some the credentials at the beginning, the username and the password. And I just want to say that it's not the instance credentials that you have to put here, but the WEkEO credentials that you use to sign into WEkEO, to put between apostrophes, as you can see here. And so we have received many questions about this. So it's not complicated. And if you have if you still have problems with that, so do not hesitate to contact us. You will have a quick response related to any issue if you want to run this file on the virtual machine. So I think that's all from me now. I pass it over to Anne-Catherine, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Amin. We will immediately move over to the training that Jeff has developed on land monitoring or crop mapping with Sentinel data. Jeff?
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. So yeah, just taking a few moments to fire up here. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this this webinar. Let me just get my presentation ready and share my screen. Okay. Okay, I hope everyone can see that now. Is that okay, Anna-Catherine?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, great. I'll start. Yeah, so I'm going to talk today about crop mapping with Sentinel data, and what I'm going to do is give you a kind of brief overview. So it's not this is a very basic introduction. This is not a detailed procedure for actually producing crop maps, but I want to explain to you how different crops appear in optical Earth observation imagery, how they change over time, and how we can exploit that information. And I will mention a few strategies for generating crop maps as well. But that's it could be a training course in itself, so that's way beyond the limits of this small introduction. But as Amin said, with a wealth of resources already available on things like the WEkEO YouTube channel and other for the training courses. So a lot of the things I'm going to talk about today can build on some of those other training sessions. So please look at those and it'll explain how to get going on a lot of these things. And Anna-Catherine mentioned the viewer, etc. And I will then also demonstrate some stuff within the Jupyter notebooks at the end. And we'll be doing some more in-depth seminars in the future. So let's get on to agricultural crops as the target for our seminar today. And of course, they are vitally important parts of our landscape. And in certain parts of the world, they end up being the most dominant land cover or land use type available, and are obviously important to providing food, etc. But what we have is actually we call them agricultural crops as a single class, but they're actually a broad range of actual crop types. So we have everything from cereals that appear like grasses, and plants like that, very thin, narrow plants, through to what we refer to as root crops, which would have its actual the food part of the crop is buried under the ground, and it's only the expression of the crop on the surface, a set of leaves, etc., that we actually can see with Earth observation. There are also very dynamic features in the landscape. They go from being bare fields at certain parts of the year through a vegetated, green, developmental phase as the crop develops and produces its fruit, etc. And then finally they will mature and reach a hard point where they're harvested, and they change again, and then the cycle will repeat. There's also seasonal differences that we know about, where these patterns of crop development change relative to seasons, and also geographically. Certain parts of the world are more appropriate for certain crop types, and therefore their appearance in images will change. And we even, depending on the climate, there may even be multiple cropping per year, etc. So there's quite a lot of variety in agricultural crops, how they can be imaged by Earth observation, and therefore how we can interpret them moving forward. And the key thing is really that not only these crops are vital to us, but they're also important in a much broader context for issues such as food security, the management of farms, etc., has an impact on climate change, and things like flooding, etc. So there's a huge range of issues that can be built on our ability to actually map and monitor crops successfully. And just to give an example here, this is a really nice NASA slide where they've looked at different farming patterns across the world. So we have block structures, which are very similar to the Midwest of the US, circular fields where we have pivot irrigation. At top right, we have slightly irregular, heterogeneous fields, more related to sort of older world, perhaps European agricultural practices where the fields are not divided into uniform blocks. We have unusual patterns where we have a central village or settlement with a set of fields running away from that and then bordered by forestry. And then we have some small, very small scale agriculture where fields may have been divided over time due to hereditary reasons, for instance, and so you end up with very narrow strips. So fields can look very different when we're in different parts of the world. And when we look at Earth observation, crop mapping was actually one of the first land applications that was developed when we were able to capture satellite imagery. This is a nice little painting of the Landsat 1, 2, and 3 satellites that were launched in the early 1970s. And they fed into something called LACY, the Large Area Crop Inventory Experiment, led by the US. And this was the first program really that said that they could take satellite imagery and from that generate both areas of crop coverage, so different crop types, what proportions they are in a particular area, and also do some estimates of what the yields might be. So can we estimate how much corn or wheat, etc., will be available at the end of the growing season? So come closer to home now. I'm going to use a lot of examples from Sentinel-2. It's an optical system. And I'm going to use examples from the UK. That's where I am, and I understand the landscape much better here. But the same data and the same principles can be applied globally, as Sentinel-2 is a global mapping system. Therefore, anything I'm saying now, you can apply in your local area, wherever you are located around the globe. So this is a true color image, and it's what we normally see if we were to look out of a sort of aeroplane window, for instance, and look down. And we can see there's different fields there. Some of the whiter ones are actually bare fields with a very light colored soil. But the rest of them are all different shades of green, and it's not really that intuitive for what the crops might be in those fields. It's just showing us that they have different amounts of vegetation there. But when we work with instruments like Sentinel-2 and and Landsat is a Sentinel-2 is a kind of follow-on really from the Landsat series of satellites, giving a similar way of observing the surface. We can see that we not only have what are the visible bands. These are for Sentinel-2. This is sort of 2, 3, and 4, which is blue, green, and red. But we also have a series of other bands where it is taking measurements, particularly in the near infrared between 800 and 900 nanometers, and then in the shortwave infrared bands 11 and 12 in Sentinel-2. And these give us a different way of looking at the surface, and they respond differently to the properties of the surface. So they give us some additional information that we don't normally see in the true color image. And if we combine 3 of those bands, in this case we're combining the near infrared, the shortwave infrared, and the red, we then get a very different picture of the landscape. And we can see now that those fields are starting to change color, because the red is responding to absorption due to chlorophyll, the near infrared is responding to internal scattering within the leaves, and the shortwave infrared is responding to the sort of canopy structure and the moisture content of the vegetation. So if we think back to all those different crops, then they will all have different responses in those wave bands. So we can now start to discriminate those different crop types. And here we have various different oranges and reds, pinks and blues, and even those white fields are now becoming separated as we're looking at different properties of those surfaces. But the other thing that we can do is we know that these things change, these crops change over time. So here's some examples from a field near my house. So on the left is how it appeared in the winter. So this was a kind of bare field. It had been ploughed and was getting ready to be harrowed and drilled with a crop. And then in the summer, the crop had grown through, and this is oats. This is a cereal crop, and you can see that now we have the field completely covered. So when we're mapping crops, we can actually now start to use that temporal change or seasonal change as a way of helping us to discriminate the different crops. So if we look again on the right-hand side, we have our original shortwave infrared composite that we were looking at a couple of slides back. But we have the same band combination, but for the winter image on the left. So in the winter, we can see the blues and greens and whites, in this case, are all the bare fields. And the different colors relate to different treatments that have been applied to the field, different types of ploughing, different types of land preparation, etc. And so you can see by combining those 2 images, then we can then learn a lot more about what is going on in those fields. So we can say how it was in the winter, how it was in the summer, and how its different spectral characteristics relate to different crop types. So if we combine those together, so I've taken now 1 band from the winter image and 2 bands from the summer image, but in a processing context, if you were to analyze this in a computer, you could use all 6 bands or all, well, it'd be 24 bands if we combined all of the Sentinel bands from 2 different dates together to do your analysis. But just for visualization purposes, we're just using 3 bands. But even just with these 3 bands, we can see now we are making much greater distinction between those crop types. We can now see some deep purples, some kind of darkish greens, reds and browns. There's some bright oranges, etc. And after looking at these images for a little while, we'll be able to identify what those different crop types are. I mean, for instance, I know that those bright oranges just above the middle there they're permanent grasslands, and they're areas that have been grass the whole year round, and they stand out quite distinctively from the other crops. So we now have this source of information that can be used to discriminate different crop types. And the next step we can do, and this is where we could run at least a day or maybe even a week's course on how to classify crops from satellite imagery. We see that there are multiple processes of taking that image and converting it into a crop map. In general, there are 2 main sort types. One is referred to as a supervised classification, where we know some information about the original area, and then we use that to train or supervise the classification approach to generate the map. There's unsupervised approaches where the processing system itself just tries to identify areas in the image that look different, have different spectral characteristics. And then later on, we can then apply a label to that. But as we go down the list, there's a whole range of more and more complex analyses. Spectral matching, if we know what different crops should look like, we can compare a library of spectra to the actual pixels in our image. We can use time series analysis, so extend our dual date analysis to more times. We can use statistical classifiers such as maximum likelihood. And then finally, we get onto machine learning and artificial intelligence, where rich training sets are used to allow the analysis system to look at a huge range of properties of that image to try and identify the crop types. So we know we can do this, but that's, as I say, it's far too complicated to talk about today. And so we end up with a crop map here. And this was a very simple map that I did with an unsupervised classification. But we can see that the imagery is mapping out the different crop types as blocks. There's some little bits of confusion around the edges, but this is where we have mixed pixels. We have small boundary features, etc., which are affecting the analysis. But in general, considering that was a very basic analysis, we've got a very good idea of the distribution of crops in that area. Okay, and this type of approach of using these dual date composites, it's been around for quite a while. And here's an example where a whole country, the UK in this case, was mapped using summer and winter images as a dual date composite. It produced an object-based image with 6.6 million objects. The smallest ones were at about 0.5 hectares, which is a suitable sized image to get within the sort of size of a field. So we can see there are plenty of fields, etc. We're mapping individual fields in this case. And then we look at what we were able to map. And in fact, although we mapped quite a general classification for the whole country, within the arable classes, we were able to identify up to 20 different crop types. So that could have been different examples of the same crop, etc. Okay. But now we've moved, as I say, that was from a few years ago that map was produced, but now we're in the Copernicus era. We now have two Sentinel-2s in orbit, the A and B units, and they're phased so that they increase the revisit time, reduce the revisit time, increase the frequency of revisit to around 5 days at the equator. And in temperate regions, we were actually 2 to 3 day repeat. So you can see that we can now build up a lot of images in a single growing season for a particular field. The 10 to 20 meter spatial resolution is well within that subfield scale. And I think you could see from those images I showed earlier that you can even see marks where the tractors have driven up and down the fields within some of those. And we can also, because we know this is of the same family of instruments as things like Landsat, we have an opportunity to integrate the Sentinel-2 data with other systems. So that means we can now move away from this multi-date classification. We can now do, away from dual dates, that's 2 days. We can now look at multi-date classification. So we could take a set of images from within the whole growing season and use that to drive our classification scheme, which would be much better at picking up crops that mature at different times during the year. And we can push that even further by looking at time series analysis in more detail. And so we can start to track crop phenology. We can see how the crop has grown over time, how it matures and when it is harvested, etc. And that leads on to an assessment of sort of farm management practices. We can see when fields are prepared for planting. We can see the texture of fields changing as the farmer applies different approaches. Then we can see the developments of the crop over time, and then do things like guiding the application of fertilizer or guiding the application of pesticides, etc., if a disease is identified, and also then to predict when is a good time to harvest. So we can do that kind of thing. So I'm now going to show a little animation. I hope this is playing okay for you guys there. This is another area close to my house here in Cambridgeshire, UK. But it's a farm which was dominated in 2020 by a crop called oilseed rape. And you've probably seen this in satellite images because it has a very distinctive and strong yellow flower as part of its growing cycle. And so what we can see here is a set of images in the spring of 2020 as the field is, the oilseed rape crop is growing, and then it is coming into flower, and then the flowering of the crop is spreading out across the field, and then the flowers are dying back. And so from this information, farmers can then start to look at how their different parts of their field are performing, at what time the majority of the crop comes into flower, etc. So the time series analysis then becomes a very powerful part of how we can monitor crop development. And taking that one step further, that's a kind of nice animation, but can we pull any quantitative information out? And one of the common things we can do with multispectral imagery is to calculate a vegetation index. In this case, we have the normalized difference vegetation index, a very common formula, which uses light or radiation from the near infrared and red parts of the spectrum. So the red is related to chlorophyll absorption, and near infrared is related to internal scattering within leaves. So where the red value is very low, we know that the crop is growing really well because it has a very high chlorophyll amount, and so that's the chlorophyll is absorbing the red light. And then where the near infrared is high, we know there is a strong leaf structure. There's a lot of vegetation, density of vegetation present there. So by taking a difference between near infrared and red, it gives us a strong idea of how the crop is growing. The red plus near infrared plus red underneath is just a way of normalizing that to normalize the values that we're recording. And so this black and white image here shows that that Ndvi. So the black areas are where it is very low. So these are areas of bare ground. There's no vegetation present, or they could be areas of water. And then where the brighter colors are where there is vegetation, and that the very bright is the very dense areas, and then the different levels of gray there tell us something about the vigor and the density of the vegetation. So that's from a single date there, but we can extend that one step further and look at how this Ndvi value changes over time. So I have a field here that I visited quite regularly last year, and fortunately Sentinel-2 did too. So it flew over and collected this set of images here. So each blue dot there on the line is a Sentinel-2 overpass, where it was clear and I was able to take a measurement of the field. And we can see there how the Ndvi increases over the spring, into the early summer, and then started to decrease again afterwards. And we can relate this to the different phases of crop growth. So early in the spring, the field is relatively bare. I mean, if we were looking down from above rather than from the side, we'd see much more soil than we would vegetation. And you can see here the farmers in the field adding some preparation or fertilizer or something to the field there. But then once we reach midsummer, the crop has completely grown. It's starting to produce the ears of the barley, the grains, etc. And so there's a lot of vegetation cover, a lot of chlorophyll, and so Ndvi is very high there. And then after the crop matures and it starts to die back ready for harvest, so this is when the crop is drying out, we then see the Ndvi decreasing then back towards to lower, decreasing towards low values. And so we can see that we can use these plots of Ndvi then to understand what is happening within each field. So not only crop type, but we can look at crop behavior and crop condition as well. So in order to conclude this presentation part here, we consider optical data as a very powerful tool for crop mapping. And the imagery we have available now, we can go from both a single date snapshot up to whole time series where we're looking at individual pixels or individual fields and how they're changing across time. There is a multitude of ways of extracting information for classification of crop types, and I recommend going to the literature. You'll be able to find plenty of examples there of how that's been done, and many image processing systems offer those sorts of capabilities. And as I mentioned at the beginning, these things can be now applied globally, but will need to be trained for different situations. So that's the only difference. So crops that are grown in the UK may not necessarily be grown in Southeast Asia, for instance, and the cropping cycles will be different there because of the climate conditions. But when we go to larger areas and larger scales, as we heard earlier from the descriptions of the diocese, we do run into some challenges with data access, data storage and processing. But by using the capabilities of the virtual machines and Jupyter notebooks within within WEkEO DIOS, we can actually alleviate those problems and make this type of analysis over very large areas, or even potentially globally, much more accessible. So to summarize and finally to say that I think Copernicus is now offering a much more complete solution in order to map crops global, from Earth observation, from data acquisition through to providing cloud processing facilities within the diocese, and also something that was touched on by Stefan to begin with and Anna-Katrine, but also a lot of ready-made services. So as well as imagery, there's also service information products that can also be used when you're looking at issues such as crop mapping. So I'll leave that there and say thanks for your attention there, but I just want to now change screens and just show you an example of the Jupyter notebook that Amin was describing. So excuse me while I just stop sharing and change screens. Okay, so you should be able to see a Jupyter notebook here. This is within the Jupyter Hub. There's a set of directories related to the different domains that have been demonstrated as part of WEkEO. So this is sitting in the land domain. So it's a small Jupyter notebook. It's called the Land S2 Crop. And it's actually it's related to some of the other notebooks that we described in the earlier training sessions. So I recommend looking at those as well, because they explain how you access the data and download them. So I'm not going to talk now about how we access the Sentinel-2 image and downloaded it to make it available to this notebook, but that's all covered in previous notebooks and also previous training courses. So please go and look at those. The two things we're going to look at today in this very brief overview is just how we read some of that Sentinel-2 data and visualize it, and then how we can process the Sentinel-2 data to a vegetation index. So it's very straightforward, but the fact that this can be done in this notebook environment is extremely useful for demonstrating and showing the capabilities. So as always, there's a lot of stuff to import from libraries, and then I've added here a description of the Sentinel-2 multispectral imager, just so to put the work in the later sections of the notebook into some context. We're also going to focus on a small area as well. So we'll be looking at some loading a bit of vector data as well. I'll show you that in a moment. So the first step we've done is to load in a true color image of the Sentinel-2 data we have available. We're looking at an area of Corsica to have a consistent area for demonstrating our activities within these training courses. And so first of all, I'm just displaying that image to make sure that we've loaded the right area. And in this true color image, we can get a quick overview of the situation, lots of sea, various land masses and clouds, etc. So this true color image just shows us whether the data we have available is going to be useful. And we're going to look, this area here on the coastal plain of northern Corsica is has been converted to agriculture or is used for agriculture. So we're going to zoom in there. And in order to zoom in, we're going to we've got an area of interest that we've selected. So we're going to load that as a vector layer into the notebook. We do have to just check that the coordinate reference system of the vector layer is the same as our image. That just would cause problems when we try to do the area of interest calculation, but fortunately they are correct there. And so what I'm doing first of all is taking the bands that I need from Sentinel-2 and I'm just cropping them to that area of interest. So this repeated block of code here opens a particular band. I'm using the 20-meter versions of those different bands. So we've got true color image is a separate band in itself, and then bands 3, 4, 8A, and 11 that we're going to use for later analysis. So it just opens those up, crops out the area we want, and then saves that back to the data storage. And then so we look at those bands individually here, we're loading those back in, and I've got 3 display chunks here which are just going to take those areas and convert them into 3 very common image combinations for visualizing the data. So on the left we have the true color image, so we have the bare fields in this case, and then a range of greens. We have a false color infrared image which uses near infrared red and green bands just to show it actually emphasizes the vegetation of an area. So we can see these bright red areas here standing out. So these are showing very well growing areas here. So the you can see here there's this bright red patch in the middle here. Doesn't perhaps look too special on this true color image, but the near infrared, the false color infrared, sorry, has emphasized that. So using that near infrared band is very useful. And then finally, we've got a shortwave infrared image on the right. So this is the same as the one I was using in the demonstration, the presentation. So we have shortwave, near infrared, and red as the 3 bands. And so we can see here we're starting to see different colors appearing, some purples, some oranges, different types of oranges, and some reds, etc. So it's given us a clear view of what the different crop types are in this area. So that was very straightforward to do with just a small block of code here that just takes various bands, normalizes them, and then displays them in this format with a proper projection information and geographic coordinates. The next step is to look at this Ndvi again. So I've included, this is a good thing about the notebooks. It allows you to include text information and figures in order for you to document the work you're doing correctly. So here's an explanation of Ndvi again. And so this time we only needed the near infrared and the red bands. And we did this simple calculation. You'll recognize that as the calculation from above there. And we've just written that file out to have it for later use. And then we've gone through this display procedure again, where we've taken the file, read it back in, and just displayed it this time. Instead of using a grayscale, we've added a green color, a white to green color palette, just to emphasize the Ndvi values there. So the darker the green, the greater the Ndvi value, and so that's a greater vigor or density of vegetation. And from that, we can then do a simple analysis like calculate a histogram. So that's all the data that's within that image there. And we can see that the Ndvi values range from just slightly above 0 here up to about 0.9. And so, but we've got very few at these low values. This is what's related to water, and there are a few channels cutting across that area. So these are the small values related to water. And then this lower end here is to do with the bare fields, which have a very low Ndvi value. And then we have a broad range of a large number of pixels between about 0.3 and 0.8 really, which are showing the different growth stages, different crop densities of crops within those fields across that area. So that's the end of this part of the presentation. This this notebook will be posted on GitHub later today, so you'll be able to download it and take a look at it. But it gives you the starting point for setting up these various images and calculating NDVIs, etc., to look at crop maps and crop areas in wherever you are working. So you will just be a matter of altering these file names here after you've used one of the earlier notebooks to actually download the imagery. So I'll leave that there, and I'll hand back over to Anna-Katrine, I think.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for the presentation and the training. I will quickly, before we will answer all of the questions that were put in the chat, but I will quickly show you what's up next after this webinar. So today we had the 5th of 12 WEkEO webinars that we're organizing, which will show you how to use the WEkEO DIAS, all of the resources, and how to use it especially for different applications, both for beginners and experts. So right now we're in a series of webinars that are aimed at beginners in the WEkEO DIAS, in remote sensing, in the use of the Copernicus data and information. And we will have 2 more beginner webinars, one on multi-temporal vision and one on air pollution, in 1 month and in 2 months. And then we will move on to more expert thematic webinars before we end off the webinar series with a webinar on business applications. For those of you that are interested in participating in the next webinar on multi-temporal vision, you will receive automatically an invitation for the next webinar after this event. So I would like to thank you all, and then I'm going to pass the floor to Stefan for the Q&A.
Thank you, Anne-Katrine. Thank you very much. And thank you, Jeff, for a very interesting presentation. So we'll take all your questions. Apologies, well, those of you who have to leave because the meeting was scheduled to end at 12:15. We're sorry for being late, a little bit behind schedule. We think it's nevertheless better to try and answer all your questions. Those of you who have to leave because they have something else scheduled can always come back to the video recording that we will post on the WEkEO YouTube channel. Okay, so let's start with questions. Does European coverage include remote islands that are part of some EU nations as France? I would, well, the Sentinel products are available worldwide. The only exception is there is a minimal surface beyond which the Sentinel does not perform acquisition as far as remote islands are concerned. But there are examples from the past. I remember vividly about the British Antarctic territories where one island was not being mapped, there was no acquisition over the island because it was too small vis-a-vis the threshold initially established, but an exception can be made. So normally you have worldwide coverage, and if the island is too small, then you can always send an email to, in this particular case, to the European Space Agency or to support@copernicus.eu, requesting that smaller islands be included. Next question.
Sorry, Stefan, just to follow that on. In some of the Copernicus products, that the French dominions are included.
Yeah, well, in fact, there's another question, but I'll answer it now to make things clear. Copernicus covers the entire globe. I mean, I think only the poles themselves, because the orbits of the satellites are not covered. So we cover the entire globe, both with satellite imagery and with value-added products. The only thing is that some products based on very high resolution imagery, such as Corinne Land Cover or European Ground Movement Service or things like that, are only available for Europe. Europe being defined as the 39 member states and cooperating countries of the European Environment Agency. So Turkey is included, Iceland is included, the countries of the Balkan, Bosnia and Herzegovina or Serbia are included. Those countries that are not included, to take it, I know Morocco, there was a question about Morocco. On Morocco, you will not have very high resolution land cover, land use data, but you have the global component of the Copernicus Land Monitoring Service, where you already have a product based on Sentinel-3, not on VHR, and therefore with a lower resolution. But all the products, whether they be them atmospheric, be them marine, be them land, they are all global by nature. So I just answered this Lubna's question. That's a question for Amin. I believe it is correct. Amin, are you? Yeah.
Yes.
I'll let you answer the questions about the IT
infrastructure. So the access to Jupyter Hub is free of charge. Signing into WEkEO gives automatic access to the Jupyter notebook. It is, as I said, completely free of charge. It's the virtual machine and the resources which are paying, but there is also a trial period associated to it. But yeah, Jupyter Lab is free of charge.
That's a very important point that I'd like to stress. For most of the plans have a trial period. Of course, the low-level plans have a longer trial period, but if you are an academic user, if you are a company and you would want to have a longer trial period, WEkEO is open. Well, we accept requests and we analyze them and potentially make exceptions on a case-by-case basis. Pricing for public bodies. Yes, there is a special pricing where there are special conditions, potentially longer trial periods, etc. This is again dealt with on a case-by-case basis. Please send an email with your specific needs to support@wekeo.eu, and we will get back to you. I mean, this is for you.
Yes, so normally it does work once you have selected the region of interest and selected the time period that you want. The order, you can send the order and you can get the files to download. So it depends on the data set itself. So if you have any doubts about this, just take a screenshot of the very specific problem that you have and send us an email to the support@wekeo.eu, and we will find a solution for you very quickly. So, but normally it does work. There is no problem.
Which cloud provider is hosting WEkEO? Well, it's a bit more complicated. It's not, because as I said, it's a distributed architecture. So each one of the data custodians has its own cloud infrastructure, sometimes owned by itself, sometimes contracted out. So EUMETSAT has its own, for Sentinel-3, for instance, EUMETSAT has its own, ECMWF has its own for climate and atmosphere data, etc. But for hosting the data from Sentinel-1 and Sentinel-2, I believe that the cloud provider is Creodias. Not Creodias, Cloudfero in Poland. I mean, this is for you.
Yes, so in the public folder, once you have opened your Jupyter notebook environment, you'll find a folder called Land, and inside you will have many Jupyter notebooks that cover this topic. But maybe Jeff can tell us more about the contents.
Yes, there's a series of 4 notebooks there at the moment, and they will increase as we do more demonstrations. The first one is a kind of a more generic notebook in terms of downloading imagery and making that available, and also download thematic products. Then we have a kind of introductory sort of notebook looking at image analysis and how we display those images and combine them and looking at how the mapping data and image data appear differently for the same area, etc. Although they have the third one is a sort of an updated version of that with some additional processing steps, which was part of our debrief for that first training. And then the final one will be today's basic crop analysis notebook, which is not available at the moment in the public area, but will be posted later today once we've sorted out from this this webinar. But yeah, and then you can take any of those and then edit them as you wish to do different areas or to do different analyses. I mean, an obvious example is using different vegetation indices. So you don't have to use Ndvi. You may have another one that you can use. So they're very easy then to edit those to work as you wish. Okay.
Amin, I'll let you answer Nordin's question.
Yes, so is there any lab platform accessible for test purposes? I guess you're talking about the Jupyter environment, or maybe about the virtual machine. The question is not very clear, but if it is about the Jupyter notebook, it can be used for test purposes, as it is free of charge. For the virtual machine resources, we have these trial periods that can be very valuable in this kind of cases. But maybe your question was deeper. I don't understand the exact meaning of the question. So just send us a message to the support, and we will see more deeply on this.
Jeff, this is for you.
Hello. Well, thank you very much that you've been inspired. The notebook will be available, as I said, later today. But in terms of paper, there's no paper. This is all very standard analysis type approaches. You can, if you Google or do a literature search for crop or land classification with Earth observation data, you should find lots of examples. If you run into any particular problems or you have a specific mapping request, then please drop us a note and we could at least point you in the right direction there for how to develop a particular solution.
That's the cloud.
Yes, that is the
number one user requirement in optical imagery. Could you please get rid of the clouds?
Yeah.
Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, if in a particular image, if there is cloud present, it can be identified by a number of algorithms and masked out. But of course, then you have a hole where that cloud was in your data, so zero values. But with systems such as Sentinel-2, they're very rapid repeat frequency. So with an image being collected every 2 to 3 days at temperate latitudes or 5 days at the equator. If your feature is not changing that rapidly, then you can actually wait for another image to be acquired or composite multiple dates. If you have cloud regularly, you can composite between the two or three dates in order to make a complete coverage. So there's quite a few strategies for dealing with cloud, and it would depend on your end requirement as to which one would be the most efficient.
Yes, I can maybe add something about this. For each Sentinel-2 image, in the metadata, you can have the cloud coverage information. So you don't have to see all the images to know whether there are clouds on it or not. You just can look at the metadata, maybe by using an algorithm or something, and know about the cloud coverage of each image.
Yeah, you can definitely select that you want to download or look only at the images that have below a certain threshold of clouds in the image.
Yeah.
Next question. We don't see questions anymore. We see 3 screens. We see 3 videos.
No other questions. No other questions.
No other questions. Well, no, I remember seeing also some questions about can these methods can be used for different other types of agricultural practices. These methods, in my view, are applicable to all agricultural practices. We have case studies or use cases of rice cultivation in the Mekong Delta. We have use cases about looking at pastoral lands in sub-Saharan Africa. These methods are not only usable on the standard European, and even in Europe, you have a high variability between cultivation patterns in northern Germany and in southern Greece. So no, these methods, there's a few things might need to be tweaked, but are applicable everywhere.
We just received the last minute question.
Yeah, I'll answer that one. Yes, Christian, I use the 20-meter bands just to make life simple for the Jupyter Notebook. As when we download the imagery, we also have 20-meter versions of all the required bands already within that archive. But I make a note in the Jupyter Notebook that all the bands could be sharpened, resampled down to 10 meters if necessary. So yes, I mean that's another way of doing it. So I could have, but just to make the notebook simple for this very short demonstration, I didn't want to go into too much depth there. Thank you.
Okay.
No
Well,
other question. No
I
other
believe
question.
we've answered all the questions. So just want to say as a conclusion that again, the video will be available shortly, and you will receive an email informing you the video recording. B, really, once again, do not hesitate to send your questions to support@wekeo.eu. Our job is to answer them, and to answer them as completely and as rapidly as possible. I'd like to thank, obviously, all of our speakers of today. It was an interesting session, and I'm happy to see that some of you have posted messages, appreciative messages into the chat. We're also very impressed to see how many of you were present today and from all over the world. So I just would like to say thank you, merci, grazie, gracias, shukran, spasiba, dankeschön, etc. to all of you. And we look forward with all the user support team to welcoming you at our next webinar, for which you will receive an invitation. So with this, we'll close the meeting. And again, we were happy that some of you appreciated the content, hopefully all of you. But thank you for the nice words. We really appreciate for all the hard work that has gone into the preparation. So thank you to the team, and thank you to all of you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.